Hi, welcome to Connecting the Dots, the podcast where we share our stories from the battlefield of consulting. I'm your host, Johnny Hill.
Hi, I'm Lynn Posick.
Hi, I'm Tim Baker.
Hi, I'm Andy Nichols.
Hey, I'm Kareem Jamal.
Today we're talking all about something that's become a little bit of a slogan here at Expiro, and that's that you don't want to build the beautiful wrong thing. What does that actually mean, though? Well, let's get started. So to start off, let's just kind of define our terms like we tend to do and talk about what do we mean when we say the beautiful wrong thing? What is that?
It can mean lots of different things. The way we interpret that often is that while something might look good on the surface, so in our world, it's mostly software, but this has to do with physical products too, right? Something might look good. It might look like it's designed really well and enticing. And when you start to use it, it might be more difficult to use. It might be not providing the value that, someone is hoping to get out of a product. And so while it looks beautiful, the beauty is like sort of just at the surface level, providing users with high value and maybe beautiful analytics in terms of the data and then getting value for it or from it or whatever it is. That is lacking in the product. So that's often how we, apply that term. Again, depending on the product and the market, it can mean lots of different things, but it's kind of making sure that the beauty, the aesthetics don't dominate, that the beauty also comes from the value of the product and, the different types of things that users can do with it and how gratifying it can be to have products, whether they're software or physical, that work really well.
The way I was looking at this was beautiful doesn't make up for building the wrong thing. So on a very fundamental level, if you miss the fact that you need to solve a real problem by just putting lipstick on the pig of a product that doesn't work or an idea that doesn't make any sense, you won't have a viable product.
Mm-hmm. Or you putting all of your eggs in the basket of making it look nice, making it function well, but is it actually solving a real problem?
Yes.
Or over-engineering something that works really, really well, but is solving, once again, the wrong problem. There's actually a whole website that's brilliant. If you take a look at it, it's called the Museum of Failure. And it's just a catalog of failed products over the years that many of them were brilliant, very well designed, very interesting, but they failed for one reason or another. And most of the time it's because for all of the intelligent decisions that were made and all of the market research that may or may not have been done, for everything that went into it, it didn't solve the right problem and ended up ultimately failing. So it's a brilliant case study in, design and engineering and all that kind of stuff. But it also kind of keys into this idea of it's a beautiful thing, but it's the wrong thing.
Right. In that pursuit of perfection and getting something very beautiful and how you think it should be, you end up sometimes building something not how it really should be, right? That the users want. And so it's amazing. It looks pretty. It's gorgeous, everything. But there's really no use case or differentiator for it because of the path you went down.
For me, the worst case of this is when we've built something or you've seen something that's just overpoweringly complex and it's become disconnected from the original use case, which was to drive a business value. And it looks great, functions great, but it's detached from the original objective or solution that you were looking for.
Definitely. I think as technologists, it's too easy to go down that path, right? We get very excited and mired in there's new technology and, we're going to make sure to include that. And, beauty isn't just about what it looks like. And architecture can be beautiful whenever it serves the right purpose, right? Code can be beautiful when it serves the right purpose. And you're right. I love that word detached, Andy, because when you become detached from what the main purpose was of what you were trying to solve, and, you want to do that in the best way, ideally, but right up to that line where you start to go over the line and then things become overly complex, even if you're solving the right problem, right?
Yeah, I think sometimes pursuing the beautiful thing can also just mean that you're late. I think in this fast moving world, especially with AI, if you focus too much on making an amazing looking thing, you'll miss the opportunity because someone else will beat you to it or the market will have moved. I've seen products that were amazing, but they were a year late and the opportunity had gone. So I think there's kind of a time dimension. We spend a lot of time helping our clients not only build the right thing, but build it quickly and fail fast. And a lot of those kinds of concepts, I think, are really important when you're developing either new products or improving products. You've got to be able to be agile and move quickly as well.
Yeah, it's almost like having a sense for what are the failures that you can take and what are the failures that you can't. Because like you were saying, you can spend so much time trying to perfect everything so that by the time you release your thing, it's exactly the vision you wanted and there's no issues at all. But maybe if you do that, if you take that to the extreme where you're releasing a year after your competitor, you can't get any market share, that's, you're already sunk at that point. So having a sense for what are the things that we're okay with getting wrong and then fixing quickly and moving on, and what are the things that are non-negotiable, these must work. It's kind of that notion that don't let perfect become the enemy of good. Starting with something that is solid and good, maybe not perfect yet, but you're working your way there and you're gaining attention in how quickly you're fixing problems, and that can become a positive spin as well, saying, yeah, look how quickly they're iterating, look how quickly this is moving, instead of, well, it came out and it was perfect, but no one paid attention because 5 other things came along beforehand.
And you can build beautiful things right, for the right market. It's just that I think sometimes, you can get pulled into either that over enthusiastic business sponsor, and I would accuse myself of this as well, where you get wedded to an idea and you pursue it blindly, and then you realize, oh, actually, that makes no sense at all. And you need someone, checking your assumptions and taking you back and pulling end users into the conversation, validating the idea really early in the process. But then you can go ahead and build something beautiful, but also make it functionally what the client or what the end user wants, as opposed to not even really fulfilling a need. So I think there's so many elements that go into building a great product, but building it quickly and solving a real client problem, an end user problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the approach should really be you build the non-hideous right thing, and then work on making it beautiful as you go.
Afterwards.
Once you validated it, you're in the market, you're first ones there, then focus on the things that really hold the value and are getting the traction, and focus on making that beautiful as you go.
And it's highly applicable to the audience we focus on, right? Of domain experts too, because often they will choose functionality over, it needs to be easy enough to use, but a lot of the functionality we deliver, some of it's very innovative and it's going to help them do their tasks and their role in many different ways that sometimes they couldn't even have imagined. And it doesn't necessarily, that beauty comes from that as well, right? Again, it doesn't have to be that. The beauty can be great. Now I have the decision support that I need. Look at this dashboard. Is it super sexy and beautiful in terms of aesthetics? Maybe not, but it's really performant. It's easy to use, and to your point, Kareem, it's not hideous. It's good and it's high value, and that value, especially again to domain experts, is something that they might describe beauty in other ways, right? Because it's the value that it's providing them in their role.
Yeah, that's very true. Like if you look at, often design principles have sort of guidelines for an airy feel, lots of white space and gutter space and things like that. So it's easily readable and it's nicely presentable, right? But as Lynn was saying, like sometimes our domain experts, like take a finance desktop, right? They want to cram as much stuff in there as they can, right? Because it's more functional and useful. They don't want to keep looking around and then get neck strained because they want everything in one spot because there's so much going on. So while the end result may not be what the design principles sort of qualify as beautiful, it's definitely a lot more relevant and valuable to those domain experts. Whereas if you build something beautiful for them that had everything spaced out, they would probably hate it.
I think there are other examples where, we have to ask the question of the client, what are you really trying to achieve? Because they come in and say, we need a new front end or we need a new analytic, whereas actually what they're really trying to do is to grow a community, or they're trying to expand into a new market, or there's some other set of needs that they're trying to fulfill, but they've expressed it in terms of, and here's the product solution. And that's why I think when we engage with clients, certainly I try to kind of understand their business and what their business objective is, and even how they make money, basic things like that. And then quite often other things surface. And I remember in a prior life, prior company, we were trying to build a competitor to Bloomberg messaging. Of course, a completely crazy thing to do because Bloomberg had locked up the buy side and the sell side, and they had built a network. We thought it would be a good idea to build a really nice, new, shiny, easy to use messaging app. And we didn't really think about how we would build the network effects that would make people want to use it. So we just assumed if we build it, they will come without thinking about the dynamic of messaging and a community. And of course, sticking content in the middle of that and thinking about how those end users make money out of information was what we should have focused our time on instead of designing a nice front end.
Mm.
Yeah, I think there's also that gap sometimes that I've seen about adoption. When you start building a visionary thing or an ambitious project, if it's too far detached from the current legacy application that's being used, there's that transition from legacy to the new. The
Yeah.
thing that people are using may be very clunky. It may not be the greatest thing. They hate it in many different ways. But guess what? They've been using it for a long period of time. They know the thing inside out. It's easier to run through the complicated screens that they've got today than necessarily transition to something that's so alien or different to the way that they're working today. So that having adoption of the end user in mind is critical, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Google Wave is a great example of that.
I love
They
that. That was a great product. I loved it. They killed it.
It really was. I mean, it was beautiful. Technologically, it was cutting edge at that time. It checked all those beautiful boxes, right? It was amazing. And yet it completely failed, right? Because that's not what the users wanted. They almost felt a little creepy as they
It
typed
was
and retyped and made mistakes in an email that someone can watch them do that, right? And there were so many things that were great about it, but like it just missed the mark over regular static email.
I think they were trying to throw a lot in there. I think you're right, Kareem and Andy. If you try to kind of create a market overnight, you leave your target clients behind. It's just too much. I think they were also early. I think a lot of things that they did was subsequently redone by Facebook and others in terms of how to build, kind of content centered sharing and all of that stuff. I remember when it came out, I was convinced that was going to change the world of messaging. And of course, many years later, Microsoft comes up with a product that is nowhere near as good called Teams. And, the whole world is using it because guess what? They have the infrastructure and the footprint, and they probably just timed the market. They would probably put that out when the customers absolutely needed it.
Yeah, like Google Docs uses part of that technology, right? Like people can see as you type, but in that context, it's not as creepy as it is in email, right? So also just keeping that mindset, like what context the user is in, also helps.
Yeah, I feel like we keep kind of coming back to that notion of recognizing this is a common mistake, and we're kind of getting into some of the solutions for getting around it. We've talked a little bit about user interviews or trying to sense the market, trying to go about introducing your product in a way that can help with adoption. But let's kind of keep going down that thread a little bit of what are some ways that you can recognize the potential for this mistake and correct for it or adapt the way that you're presenting or releasing your product to try to avoid releasing it as something that there is no market for, or that you're not explaining it in a way that it would be easy to adopt it.
So, like all the things you're pointing out, Johnny, are some of the catastrophes that happen, right? When you're trying to figure out, I mean, really, yeah, you're trying to do the market sensing. I think some of it comes down to not falling in love with your product and being
Mm.
open to listening, like really
Yes.
listen. What are people really saying? And don't just do like I used to often call this like loser market research because people would go in and only like they knew the things they wanted to hear. And so they'd really hunt for those and then put a lot of emphasis on, oh, well, they did say a few of these things, yeah, but the other 90% of what they said
Mm-hmm.
is telling you that you need to pivot or you need to make some subtle changes or whatever, right? So, like, don't fall in love with your product and be really listening and attentive. Because, look, even if you find it lands at first, product market fit is about a much longer duration, right, of
Mm-hmm.
something lasting in the market. So, you always have to be on top of it and see, is it really landing? Does it still have traction? Are people still, excited about the product and enjoy using it? Or is it a slog because, in the case of enterprise, they're forced to use it, or whatever. And it never ends. It's a constant curation process too, to ensure that you continue to have those open ears and like product market fit.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say the same thing. I'm thinking of FactSet is a great company that really has the voice of the client. Every member of staff has to be in a client-facing role when they start at the firm, and they've built systems to constantly listen. They talk about the voice of the client, but they really build that into their product lifecycle. And it's not, as you say, Lynn, it's not just a one-off thing, it's continuous. And then
Yes.
they're really, really focused on solving client problems, and they surface those because everyone's listening out for them, and then they have a process to filter them, and then their product folks are, because of that, very attached to the client, whereas a lot of companies, the product people are kind of somewhat aloof and don't go out into the field and aren't talking, whereas the product people at FactSet, as an example, have been client facing. They know how to pick up the customer and validate a requirement, and they also can sniff, the wrong idea or something that's not gone through the
Mm.
prioritization process. So I
Mm-hmm.
think you're right. I think it's got to be built in. It's got to be continuous as well as just, fixing an old product and then walking away from it again.
Yeah, I was talking, funny you should say that, Tim. I was talking to a product manager a few days ago and we were just general conversation, but he was stumped on something. And I said, go talk to the support desk, ask them. They'll give you the answers immediately. Everybody ignores them. It's like they're supporting the product. They know this product inside out. They know exactly what the client's upset with, how many times it happens, the things they see frequently. They can provide a whole host of new thoughts and ideas around how to build a replacement product or a new service. They're often ignored at risk.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
and it's important to make sure you're talking to the right people, many of them, and multiple times as well, right? So I feel we can have a full episode about talking about failed products here, which may be kind of fun. Um, but like take New Coke, right? I'm sure they experimented New Coke with lots of people that said, "Oh, this is good," but was it the right people? Was it just the first time effect? Like if you give them the first can, they like it, but if they were told to drink it like 10 times, they wouldn't like it anymore because they can't have a new model that just says we're only designing this for first time use for everyone, right? It needs to be a continual thing. And
Mhm.
I don't want to just pick on Coke, so I can also say, Crystal Pepsi or Pepsi AM or something, right? So there's tons of those where make sure that when you're doing the testing part of it, you're doing the right samples and sort of over time doing it again and again to make sure it's validated and holds up to the
Right.
initial impressions.
And asking the right questions. Like, I obviously wasn't in the room for that, but were the people who said, I like this, aware that, oh, well, this would replace the old thing instead of be a new option for something else that I would enjoy? Are you talking about introducing something entirely new to the market? Are you talking about changing something that currently exists? Because you may find out through the market sensing process, like, there may not be necessarily a market for this as its own thing, but it could be applicable for like an upgrade to an existing thing out there. So, it depends on, are you asking the right questions, and are you aware of like how to take the answers that you're getting and ingest those properly to actually accurately understand, rather than kind of like what Lynn was saying, are you kind of, you've made up your mind already, you know what you want to do, you're just looking for like confirmation, and then the whole confirmation bias thing comes in where you just kind of picking and choosing the feedback that you like. I think that's a real danger to be aware of, but also recognizing that based off the feedback you get, you likely will need to pivot or change your approach or change your strategy, and that's okay. That's part of why you're doing that research anyway. We already talked a little bit about it, but I know one big part of it is understanding the context of the target audience. I think Andy was talking about that some, like what is the person who's going to be using this, like what is their setup like? Do they have a single, for software, am I on a laptop and I have a really small screen? Is this something I expect to be able to use on my phone? Do I have a setup with 5 different monitors with a bunch of stuff on it all the time? Those kinds of questions are important for just knowing, like, how will this thing be used and how can that affect the way that we approach presenting it to the end user? So like in the example of finance, oftentimes if you're introducing a new finance product, it's going to be one of 15 other things that are all flashing and trying to get your attention. So knowing how to differentiate yourself in that context is very, very different from, hey, you got an email, you should look at that at some point soon. It's very different time pressures, very different environment it's being consumed in. So those are all important factors to consider.
I think that screen real estate thing is so important. You're right, in finance, but probably increasingly elsewhere as well, where we hear about the so-called swivel chair where you're having to access 10, 15, 20 applications in a day. And if you don't think about where your product fits into that workflow and also fits onto the screen, you're probably going to lose immediately. And certainly with a trader, they are very jealous and protective of that screen real estate. We looked at a company a few years ago, and they come up with a set of goggles basically that would simulate your screens. So you could plug it into a Bloomberg, and it would give you 6 screens, and you could look at charts in 3D, and they completely missed the point that a trader just wants more screens. I mean, that's a status symbol as much as give me another screen. And these goggles were so heavy that I don't think they were battery powered, so they were plugged in. And then they realized eventually that traders like to kind of look at the rest of the trading floor and see what's going on. But at that point, it wasn't like the new Apple product. You couldn't see through the. So it's another great example of kind of not really thinking about your end user and what their preferences are. Yes, screen real estate, but just giving them a set of virtual screens doesn't solve that problem. As cool as it is, we didn't find anyone who was remotely interested in wearing goggles all day and looking like an idiot on the trading floor.
And
Yeah.
to kind of piggyback on what you were saying, the context and the extent of the context is super important. So in the case of trading, it's a set of screens. It could be how your product fits into a much larger set of processes, right?
Oh yeah.
Or workflows or whatever it is, right? And it's very easy to get sort of myopic and think, your product isn't the only product this person is using to complete some bigger tasks, but it's very easy to get myopic about it. And it could be your product is used seasonally or your product is used once a week versus everything else going on in their world and their desktop and whatever, and understanding both the benefit and maybe potential opportunity to take up a little bit more of that time or a little bit more of that desktop or whatever it is if you're providing value. But again, over the years I found people often aren't grounded in reality, like when you bring them back to, well, how often are people using your product, or what role does it play, like in some critical process or whatever. It's surprising how people get all wrapped up, and it's easy to think of your product as the center of the universe instead of the broader context. And then how does your product plug into that ecosystem and better support the user, and be thinking about opportunities to do that, like tendrils from your product or whatever, right, as opposed to just focusing on it.
Yeah, I think a good example of that, and Andy and I have been working with this company IPC, and they provide what I call telephony solutions for traders. So those telephones that you can have multiple calls going on, and they're very complex pieces of hardware. And we've been working with them to build an OpenFin version that connects your CRM, your Salesforce, your Teams with your telephone. So when a call calls you, the Teams card will come up or the Salesforce card will come up. So when we've shown that to traders and end users, it's magical because it's started to connect the stuff that they hate doing, which is pulling up all these applications, and it kind of does it magically for you. I think that's a great example of where you can take I think IPC have been around for 50 years, and they're completely reinventing their products by rethinking how the phone actually is the thing that should sit in the middle of your high value client interactions. So there's a huge opportunity, working with firms like that who are prepared to kind of rethink their whole proposition. And if you don't do that, you kind of end up with something pretty stale. It is about workflows and not just building a product in isolation. And again, it can be beautiful, but if it doesn't save the end user or the company money or help them make more money or help them cover more clients or help them gather more assets, it's not really that useful. It's not moving the needle.
One other thing that Lynn was saying that made me think of something else is see how your product fits into the processes, but also into the sort of screen real estate, the dashboard, right? You may have done everything right and built something beautiful that's also functional and works great and even had great user testing scores in a silo, right? But if your product is sitting alongside something else inside a dashboard, it may look too beautiful to where everything else looks slightly uglier now, right? In comparison. And so the overall experience with the full platform may actually go down as a result, because now all of a sudden people are comparing and saying, oh, the rest of the platform looks kind of ugly, right? And so also those are factors to keep in mind that don't just test in a silo, test in the actual integration environment to see how it all plays out.
Right. Especially if you're taking the approach like, well, we're adding this new feature, we're adding this new piece, we're adding this new step. And if it feels completely disjointed from everything else, yeah, it can really affect and even feel like, oh, this doesn't belong here. I don't want to use that thing because it doesn't seem like it's part of what I should be normally doing because it's so different. So yeah, keeping that in mind and the larger process is a big part of it for sure. And then I know another element can be, I guess we've talked a little bit about this, but just recognizing like what are the other tools that are being used? Are you asking users to add one or two or three or four more steps where they're jumping into different things? Are there ways you can simplify that? Because it may be that, well, yeah, like you were saying, on your own, it's a four-step process. It's really not that hard. But when I need to first go to the new app and then log in and then connect that to my existing system and then go and copy and paste the ID from there into here, like it can very quickly snowball once you realize, oh, what are the steps I need to take to not only do the thing, but to prepare to do the thing and then take the result that I got from the thing and do something with that. Keeping those things in mind, I think, is really important, but easy to forget when you're so entrenched in like just the one thing I'm focused on.
That's a great point, Johnny. I think if you can win over your client, not by just building the beautiful thing, but solving that really annoying thing as well. Quite often, it's just that now I don't have to cut and paste anymore, or I don't have to use Excel to divide these three numbers and then cut paste it somewhere else. So I think there's another element of this, which is around data, which we see all the time, which is quite often the front end is kind of hiding bad data. And we've had engagements where we've done a really nice design job where we explain how to, integrate products and to make them look and fit better to address your issue, Kareem. But actually, when we then show it to the end users, and I'm thinking of some financial advisors, they love the designs, but then they look behind it and said, yeah, but the data's different from these two systems and they should be the same. And that's not our problem. But you can't just kind of solve all of this with a nice front end. You have to kind of get into the data as well. And I think we see a lot of that issue. You've got to, and that's kind of the boring stuff, right? Fixing your database of records or having a better compliance system or, having, just one system to keep your books and records and not four. They're big, horrible projects to deal with, but if you just build a beautiful thing on top of it, then you'll end up with, a failed project.
Yeah, I'm curious. We've talked a lot about why the beautiful wrong thing is not the right approach and gotten into a good amount of like, how can you recognize that and work through it, avoid that mistake? I'm curious though, what makes it so difficult to recognize when you're building the beautiful wrong thing? And why is that such a temptation to do, like to focus on the visual or focus on the cool thing that demos really well, but doesn't actually solve the problem? And how can you recognize when you're going down that path and correct for it?
Well, it's fun. Building
The
building that
endorphin.
extreme platform is a lot of fun. It's almost like an open book, right? Just go for it. But we've seen recently where, with a startup firm, they embraced everything. And in the end, there was a platform that we had that was really, to build it out fully, was in excess of any reasonable budget or reasonable time frame that you could imagine. So they lost track of what they were trying to achieve in the short term, and just kept, adding to the vision continuously,
Mm.
and bypassed any opportunity they had to address a short need or a opportunity in the market, to Tim's point.
Yeah, I think it's a lot harder to do your homework and to limit the scope and to know what to say no to or know what to say what can wait than it is to just say, let's just try to do it all. Like it's in some ways it's easier to ignore those hard questions and just go for it, but you end up paying for it in the end. And having the discipline to do your homework, do the research, decide what can wait, what can be cut, what is most important, it's for the best in the end, but it takes a lot of discipline. It takes a lot of time. And sometimes, especially when like the budgets are tight and it's a startup culture, it can be hard to say, like, do we really have time to slow down and do those things? Shouldn't we just move quickly? Which you can move quickly and still ask those questions, but it does take some time and some resources. And sometimes it's easier just to ignore it and just plow ahead and hope for the best.
Yeah, I really like the way that Xpero does discovery. We talk about discovery and design, but one of the outcomes of our discovery and design is always a phased approach to the development. And I think that adds so much value, because you'll get faster deliverables, you can validate quicker, you can show early and often as you progress, and get much more fluid feedback. So I think that's a great way of avoiding that mistake. Having a solid discovery and phasing out the development based on, smaller use cases, subsets of the bigger use case, maybe.
Yeah, I've seen over my career, and I've probably put my name to some of these projects where they've been way too ambitious, too broad. They've delivered a year late, and then we wondered why we built it in the first place, instead of breaking it down, having an MVP, getting out to market, actually having some prototypes,
Yeah.
and showing them to clients, and then having the culture that allows you to say, hey, this is the wrong project. Let's move on to the next one. Or, oh, there's a major assumption we were making here and it's wrong, about a user need or a client need. So I totally agree with you, Andy. I think our approach and just the general approach of I don't like fail fast. I like to think of it more in terms of succeed quickly. But I think you only do that by breaking everything down into manageable pieces and then having and Kareem, I'm thinking of your beautiful Gantt charts that you do, where the client has got total visibility as to what they're going to get by when, and they're being demoed something every 2 weeks. So you're getting that instant feedback. And quite often we're pushing to say, okay, can we show this to your end users, to your financial advisors, to your traders? And one of the things that we've got quite good at is packaging up those early designs and in such a way that they can then be fed out and get feedback from within the company. It's really protecting our customers, the product managers and the business heads. We're protecting their jobs as much as anything, because no one wants to have their name on that multi-million-dollar project that was just ill-conceived with hindsight. And that's how you kind of build credibility with clients over time. You look out for them, you help them fail fast or succeed quickly, and you de-risk the whole process.
I think sometimes it's a personality thing too, right? They're just, we know what I'll call stubborn persistence, right? They go up on their ivory tower and they like, I'm going to build something that I believe is the right way to do it. I don't care what anyone else is doing. This is my belief that this is the right way to do it, right? And that's sometimes how you get market disruptors, but not everything has to be a market disruptor, right? Not everything has to be that chaotic to shuffle things around. And
Mm.
so sometimes it's that sort of mental state that gets you into building this beautiful, perfect thing that no one wants to touch, right? As you're in your tower. And so maybe, maybe there's a recognition there that that personality exists, and maybe we have to talk to them a little more. Or if they're in their tower, maybe let Rapunzel come down every now and then to show a demo and see like, hey, here's where we're at now. And then you go back to your tower and work on a little more with that feedback and, iterate on that. But there's also those states that can get you into a bad spot in the end.
What was that book that came out many years ago? It's all about CEOs or psychopaths. And, very often the same traits that make not great CEOs, but scary, bad CEOs is just a complete disregard and lack of empathy. And quite often, the more senior you get, the more detached you come from the clients and the business. So that's another risk. You really, again, firms that have got the voice of the client and boil that up through the organization and then empower the product owners to make the call based on data, they're the best companies. Probably the best companies for us to work with too, because they can deliver all the raw materials we need to build that beautiful, successful product that everyone wants.
And to piggyback kind of on what both of you were saying, I think with some of our startup clients and companies that we work with, they're very passionate, right? And often they're coming from the SME, they are the SMEs, so much so they decided to start a company or as an entrepreneur, start something, as a BU or whatever it is. But that passion can be both invigorating and sometimes, really close. It can also be blinding to like what the market really needs or what the market needs as a first step to start to get traction, right? Not, need to build everything at once. And so Andy was mentioning, basically the prioritization factor, right? And how critical that is to being able to like really put your passion aside for a minute and let's be real about what's going on in the market and, what really needs to be built and, in what order. But I think a lot of the startups we work with, which is exciting, very passionate people. And sometimes it works in your favor and sometimes you can get blinded by that as well.
Thanks for connecting with us today. If you have a complex software problem that needs solving, thoughts on what we discussed today, or ideas on what topics we should tackle next, feel free to reach out to us at podcast@experoinc.com or on Twitter @experoinc. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to connecting with you next time.